Hey everyone, this is Mike 1013 for FlopTurnRiver. Today I want to look at a specific situation and a specific flop and decide how our ranges are going to change depending on the opponent we're facing. So let's suppose an opponent raises pre-flop, we cold call in position, and we see a flop of Jack 9-5 with a couple of spades, and our opponent c-bets into us. On a flop like this, we're going to have a variety of different hands, some strong, some not so strong, some very weak indeed. To make things easier for us, I've made a list kind of representative hands that are at the top, middle, and bottom of our range. And I've separated them out into made hands and drawing hands. This distinction's somewhat arbitrary, but I think it's useful when we're talking about different types of hands in different parts of our range. Suppose our opponent is a loose passive fish. What kind of hands do we want to raise, call, and fold against him? Well, I think we get a lot of value from our big hands against a player who can't fold, who's showdown bound. Depending how weak and how much he likes to call, we might be able to raise any top pair against him. On the other hand, we shouldn't be bluffing him very much, and we shouldn't be turning our strong draws into bluffs either, or into semi-bluffs, because since he's so loose and passive and showdown bound, he's likely to let us draw at our hand and still pay us off anyway, even when we complete the draw. I've decided to represent these three ranges of hands that we're going to raise, call, and fold with a series of colored bars along the lists here. So the part in red represents our raising range, which is basically monsters and top pair. Then we have our calling range in green, both for made hands, kind of middle pairish type of things, and our strong draws here also in the calling range. And then our folding range in black. What if our opponent is not a fish at all, but kind of a reg, kind of a standard taggy type of player? Well, against the tag we can't raise quite as wide for value, but on the other hand we can bluff him and semi-bluff him certainly a lot wider than we could the fish. I think something like this looks about right. In our raising range we'll have not only monsters and perhaps top pair top kicker, but also big combo draws that we can raise and call it off with in case we get 3-bet. We should have enough fold equity to make those big monster draws certainly very profitable. And even if he does continue, we're probably a favorite or just a slight dog against his range. We're going to call his bet with our medium strength made hands, stuff like pocket tens, maybe jack 10, and also with our big draws that have good implied odds, things like the ace high flush draw or queen 10 for the straight draw. We'll also be able to call as a float with some marginal hands, things like maybe bottom pair with backdoor club draw or gutter plus overcards. Our plan being we can either improve on the turn or our opponent might give up and we can take the pot down on the turn with a bet. Finally, we're going to raise with some bluffs, some hands that are too weak even to call as a float. So something like maybe bottom pair with a bad kicker and no backdoor draw, or ace high with a backdoor club draw. I think these are pretty good ranges against the standard tag. Now when we play against other regs, we're going to start to detect leaks in their play. Suppose we find a player who likes to c-bet the flop, but he often check folds the turn. How do we exploit such a player? Well, I think we need to try to get to the turn as often as possible because that's where he makes his major mistakes. We're going to want to float this guy pretty wide, but not necessarily bluff raise him a lot, because bluff raising is an expensive move, and calling to float is much cheaper. So our ranges against the guy who bets flop a lot, but check folds the turn, are going to look something like this. We've expanded our calling range and cut down on our bluff raising range. Now let's consider a different opponent. Suppose this opponent plays turns reasonably well, but he has a big leak on the flop, which is he dislikes continuing to flop raises, and he folds to our flop raise way more often than he should. Well, we have to adjust our ranges to take advantage of this opponent tendency. Since he's making errors when facing flop raises, we want to make him face flop raises as often as possible. I think ranges that look somewhat like this are good against a guy who folds too many flop raises. We've taken some of the more marginal, floaty type hands and instead are using them as bluffs because this guy displays the tendency that he's going to fold to the bluff raise way too often. Also, we've very slightly narrowed our flop value raising range. Since this guy's folding a lot of his hands, some of our more marginal value raises become unprofitable because he won't be continuing with worse hands often enough. In summary, you should always be willing to adjust your different ranges to take advantage of any exploitable tendencies that you find in your opponents. If you play the same hands the same way in different situations, you're giving up way too much. Thanks for watching. Good luck at the tables. See you guys later.